My thesis presentation is entitled Lignocellulose Biocomposites, a comparison of wood fibers and microfibrillated lignocellulose. One of the main environmental problems of today's society is that we are demanding natural resources more than what is sustainable. So we really need to think about waste management, reusing, reshaping, and recycling of the materials. But we also need to think about using of renewable resources and degradable materials to a greater extent. One of the great examples of such environmental friendly materials are forest-based materials. In the Northern Hemisphere, there is a large land area covered by forests, particularly in Sweden. Almost 70% of the land area is covered by forest, and this is very important for Swedish economy also. Forest-based materials have been used for a very long time during the history for building materials, construction of ships, barrels, paper, and also recently to materials which are somehow comparable with fossil-based polymer and composite materials. And they are really great since they are from renewable resources. They are mechanically strong and potentially of low environmental impact. So here in this picture, you see the hierarchical structure of wood. You see in the wood tissue, the wood fibers are organized. And then if we take a look into cell wall of the wood fibers, we see cellulose microfibrils lined in an order. And these microfibrils actually are semi-crystalline cellulose fibrils coated with hemicellulose and are embedded into a matrix of lignin. And from a composition point of view, about 20 to 30% of wood tissue is composed of lignin, 20 to 40% composed of hemicellulose, and 40 to 50% composed of cellulose. So, as I said, the wood fibers are bound together in the wood tissue by pulping processes by means of by mechanical means or chemical means. We can liberate the wood fibers, and the widths of the wood fibers are typically about 30 micrometer. And then using fibrillation process, for example, high pressure homogenization, we can liberate the microfibrils from the wood fiber cell walls. And the thickness in the microfibrillated cellulose is typically between 2 nanometer up to 1 micrometer. And about the motivation behind this work, so we were interested in kraft pulps. As you can see in this figure, almost 70% of the pulping processes in Europe it includes a kraft process. And recently, a high-yield unbleached kraft pulp is gaining interest. This is mainly due to environmental reasons. As you can see in these pictures, the cumulative energy demand, the global warming potential, and water depletion value for high-yield unbleached wood fibers is comparably lower than the bleached wood fibers. And the objectives of this work. So process structure property relationship was the main objective, particularly the effect of fiber residual lignin content on the fibrillation process and the morphology of the resultant microfibrillated lignocellulose. Microstructural effects of reinforcement geometry, I mean fibers versus fibrils on mechanical properties of biocomposites. And this has been the major scientific objective of my study, and that's why I put it into the title of the presentation. And then to gain reinforcement control in biocomposites for increased fiber content and enhance the dispersion. And we do this all in the sustainable development framework, and we evaluate the environmental impact and reduce when this is possible in the processes to create materials. So the results come into 4 different parts. Part 1 is micro and nanofibrillated lignocellulose for nanopaper films. Part 2, all lignocellulose biocomposites from hot pressed fibers and nanopapers. And part 3, degradable polycaprolactone biocomposites. And part 4, sustainability aspect and environmental impact. So part 1, we have started everything from spruce wood chips with about 20% lignin content. We did typical kraft pulping, but what we have varied was the length of pulping from about 30 minutes up to 390 minutes. And a fraction of the pulp, which has been cooked for the longest time, has been further bleached also to create a sample with lower lignin content, so that we could create a series of pulp fibers with different lignin, with different residual lignin content. In these same images, you see a picture of some of the wood fibers with 2% residual lignin content, 11% and 24% residual lignin content. You can see in the wood fiber with low residual lignin content, the structure of the wood fibers is collapsed in some parts. We see a lot of kinks and bends and shells. But the wood fibers with 11% residual lignin content, they seem to preserve the structure pretty good. And this is uncollapsed, and the number of kinks seems to be pretty low. This is also similar for the wood fibers with 24% residual lignin content. But in very high residual lignin content pulp fibers, we see some presence of fiber bundles also. In this plot, what you see is the composition of the wood fibers. With the increase of residual lignin content, we see that the cellulose content decreases a little bit. Importantly, we have measured the total charge of the wood fibers, and we see with increase of the residual lignin content, the total charge increases. And this is very important. I will come back to this later on. And then using high pressure microfluidization, we were able to disintegrate the fibers into microfibrillated lignocellulose. And these microfibrillated lignocellulose are pretty heterogeneous. You see they are branched in the ends. We see also some occurrence of the entanglements. But if I want to simplify the size of these fibrils, for MFLC with 2% residual lignin content, we see that the widths of these fibrils are below 0.8 micrometer in thickness. And this is pretty similar for the MFLC with 11% residual lignin content. But MFLC with higher residual lignin content, we see that they are coarser, and the widths of the fibrils go up to about 2 micrometers. We then separated the nano-sized fibrils with careful centrifugation, and what comes in the supernatant is the fibrils that you can see in these TM images. So the widths of these fibrils are below 100 nanometer, and that's why we call them LCNF, or lignin-containing cellulose nanofibrils. We have then calculated the weight fraction of these nano-sized fibrils to the whole population of the MFLC fibrils. And we plotted the nanofibril yield here. You see with increase of the residual lignin content, the nanofibril yield increases to about middle range residual lignin content, but then it decreases when it goes to very high lignin content. Here you see the total charge that I talked previously. So the total charge increases with the increase of the residual lignin content. We think that the total charge helps for the swelling of the cell wall in the wood fibers and the delamination process in the wood cell wall and for the fibrillation. So we have increase of charge, and it should make it easier for the fibrillation as long as we are increasing the residual lignin content. But we have another mechanism also, and this is lignin binding effect. And this holds the fibrils all together and makes it also difficult for the fibrillation. As a result, we see an optimum and a trade-off between two mechanisms. So about 11% residual lignin content is the optimum lignin content, is where we have pretty high charge and for the help of fibrillation, but the lignin binding effect is not so strong to prevent the fibrillation. We have then created nanopapers from the whole population of MFLC fibrils and also only the nano-sized fractions. We did vacuum filtration and oven drying overnight in 50 degrees. And in the right plots, you can see that the transmittance and haze data for these nanopapers. Just you can focus in these two samples. So the only difference is the size of the MFLC fibrils. For the MFLC case with coarser fibrils with the whole population, we see that the transmittance is lower than the nano-sized nanopaper, and the haze is much higher compared to LCNF nanopaper. This is the same case. This is the same case for the whole for the different compositions as well, and we also see that with increase of residual lignin content, the transmittance decreases, and this is related to the light absorption of the chromophores in the lignin, and this is particularly in the low wavelengths. And this sample, MFLC, with 24% residual lignin content, had the highest porosity, and it showed very low transmittance. We have then plotted the tensile curve for the LCNF and MFLC nanopaper films. We can see that generally the mechanical properties of LCNF and MFLC films are not so different. And interestingly, the modulus and the ultimate strength of the MFLC with 2% residual lignin content and 11% are similarly strong, and they are comparable in modulus and strength. So to summarize this part, we have found the optimum residual lignin for an increased fraction of nano-sized MFLC. And this is where the high fibrillation yield and the high lignin content happens. The optical properties of the nanopapers were sensitive to fibril size and also porosity. And the MFLC films with 2% and 11% residual lignin show similar modulus and ultimate strength. So up to here, we realized that porosity is very important. So we were thinking, if we can use the residual lignin and hemicellulose, and we can plasticize and hot press them to create densified and possibly stronger structures. So that's why we tried hot pressing, and this is in part 2. So we did vacuum filtration of MFLC suspension, and then we did hot pressing in 185 centigrade degrees. You see the hot pressed MFLC with 2% residual lignin and 11% residual lignin content. If we take a look into the surface of these structures, we see that the MFLC with 11% residual lignin content, the surface is more smooth and seems more densified. Then we have measured the tensile properties of hot press MFLC with different lignin content. I extracted the modulus and ultimate strength data in this plot. What we see here is that with increase of residual lignin content, both modulus and strength increases to about the middle range. And finally, with increase to very high residual lignin content, this drops. So the increase is related to lignin binding and improved stress transfer, but the drop of the mechanical properties in the end is more related to, for example, porosity, as you see here, and this is related to coarser MFLC fibrils in those samples. We measured also specific surface area, and you can see in this plot that the hot pressed MFLC show reduced the specific surface area compared to oven-dried samples, particularly for the very high residual lignin content. And with this hot pressing, we were able to push the mechanical properties, the tensile strengths and modulus to much higher values. In this plot, you see the typical modulus and strengths for a typical paper wood fiber sheet and also nanopaper. Obviously, the modulus and strengths for nanopaper is much higher. But if we think the density of these two structures are really different, one possible thing to do for the comparison is to define specific properties, like a specific modulus and a specific strength. So we divide the property into density for the comparison. But if we think about the implicit and underlying assumption, it means that these properties are scaling linearly with the density, and this may not be true. So instead, we did a very careful study. So we created MFLC and wood fiber sheets with similar density and overall porosity. So overall porosity were about 25% for both these structures. We take a look into cross-section of these structures. The porosity in the MFLC film, the size of these pores are submicron. And the nature of these pores are also different. So the size of these pores in the hot pressed wood fiber is in the size of tens of microns, and the nature of that is related to the gaps between the wood fibers. The specific surface area for the MFLC films were much higher compared to hot pressed wood fibers. We have then plotted tensile strengths, tensile care for the hot pressed wood fiber and the MFLC structure of 11% residual lignin content for the similar density. And in this plot, you see that the tensile curve for these structures in the elastic region is pretty similar, but the MFLC structure with a smaller pore size and smaller defects, they will fail at much higher strain. So these small pores and defects delay the failure to much higher strain and higher strength values. And this is the same case for all other compositions. The strengths for the MFLC were comparatively higher for the MFLC structures, and the density and the modulus was the same. We see with increase of the residual lignin content, these ultimate tensile strengths and modulus increases. This is related to lignin binding and better stress transfer due to that. And we also see the drop in mechanical properties at high residual lignin content. This is more related to heterogeneity in the structure and the larger defect size related to fiber bundles or coarser fibrils. We have then also created hot-pressed wood fiber structures from industrial wood fibers, oriented structures, and also random in plane wood fiber structures. For the orientation, we have used dynamic sheet former, and then we did hot pressing in the similar manner. In this plot, you see the tendency of the wood fiber orientation in the longitudinal direction. And we measured also the tensile properties of them. In the longitudinal direction, the modulus and the ultimate strength is pretty high, and it's about 2.5 times more than the transverse direction. Modulus is about 20 gigapascal, and ultimate strength is about 210 megapascal. We also tracked the strain field distribution, and here in these plots, you can see these 3 different points in the tensile curve. So the strain field distribution initially in the elastic region seemed pretty homogeneous for all these 3 structures. As soon as the irreversible deformation starts, this heterogeneity starts, and relatively higher. This is for transverse direction hot press wood fibers. This is relatively higher. This is related to these large and compliant regions are related to defects and micro cracks and difference in thicknesses of these structures. So to summarize this part, we have created hot press MFLC films. Despite the presence of coarse fibrils, these nanopapers showed really high mechanical properties, up to 220 gigapascal and 260 megapascal in strength. The comparable wood fiber and MFLC films with the same density showed a similar modulus, but the MFLC film showed higher strain at break and ultimate strength due to a smaller defect size, and increased residual lignin content up to about 11 to 17% increased the modulus and strength related to improved interfiber bonding and stress transfer. And the hot pressing of the wood fibers, of the oriented wood fibers, enabled us to create really strong biocomposites with the modulus of about 20 gigapascal and strength of 210 megapascal. So up to now, I've been just talking about all lignocellulose biocomposites. They are very interesting. As I said, they are from renewable resources and they are mechanically strong, but they have some limitations. They are sensitive to moisture, and also we have limitations in the shaping of them for the complex 3D structures. So if we can introduce a polymer, a thermoplastic polymer into these structures, we can improve the moisture sensitivity and also enable better shaping possibilities. In-situ polymerization technique seems very interesting since this is direct and energy efficient. So we can synthesize the polymers inside the wood fiber networks, and possibly we can have really good dispersion because we can have water processing of the wood fiber or MFLC network in the beginning, and then we do the in-situ polymerization. And this has of little or no reinforcement damage, and possibly this can also improve the interfacial adhesion. We decided to move on with polycaprolactone as the model polymer for the in-situ polymerization, but there is an issue, and this is moisture. So the moisture in the environment can be absorbed into the wood fibers, and this can initiate the polymerization. As a result, the molecular weight of the final PCL polymer decreases. We overcome this issue by synthesizing 3-arm caprolactone oligomers of double functionalities, hydroxyl group and the carboxyl groups. And this can be polymerized. This polymerization is not sensitive to water. And this creates a semi-cross-linked polymer. And we were able to hot press and shape this into a like a thermoplastic film, as you can see. We impregnated the fiber mats or MFLC mats with the oligomer. We did in-situ polymerization and hot pressing. And we could also do thermoforming for the shaping. In these images, you see the wood fiber biocomposites before and after hot pressing, and also similarly for the MFLC biocomposites. And the cross-section of these structures. The dispersion of MFLC and wood fibers seems pretty good. And if we take a look here, the interfacial bonding seems pretty good, as we don't see any sign of debonding. We then also measured the tensile properties of these wood fiber and MFLC biocomposites. The MFLC biocomposites delay the fracture to much higher strain values, and this is related to small pore size and defects and small fibril size in them. But the coarse wood fibers, they initiate the fracture, and due to coarser and larger defects in the structure, they have a much lower global failure. With this polymerization technique, we were able to really push these composites to much higher reinforcement content, as you can see, compared to the literature values. And with increase, so we can see, for example, here, we were able to create wood fiber biocomposites with about 77% reinforcement content, and this increased the ultimate tensile strength up to 80 megapascal and the modulus up to 6.6 gigapascal. To summarize, the MFLC biocomposites showed higher strain at break and strength than wood fiber biocomposites. The polymerization system enabled a drastic increase in wood fiber content and maintaining good dispersion. So now we want to talk about the sustainability aspect and environmental impact. If we think about the life cycle of the wood-based materials, in the beginning we have natural resources. We can extract chemicals, solvent, water, and energy from the natural resources, and also material components like wood, wood fiber, and nanofiber. And then these all go into production and manufacturing stage, and then they can make up different products. And then they will go into application and use phase for different uses. And finally, there will be end-of-life scenarios like reusing, reshaping, recycling, or whatever. Following the Michael Ashby's suggestion, we have decided to identify and determine the eco-indicators in the cradle-to-gate boundaries. And this is cradle-to-gate boundary, this red rectangle here. And this includes all the processes and activities up to application and use phase. And as an important eco-indicator, we have calculated cumulative energy demand, including the energy demand for the components, for the chemicals, and the processes involved. We see in this plot that the CNF and MFLC have more total cumulative energy demand. And when we include the processes to create materials, the total energy demand will be much higher for the MFLC or CNF products compared to the wood fiber materials. And this is highly influenced by the film forming and the watering of the CNF or MFLC water suspensions. We have also thought about the end of life, and we have tried initially to recycle the individual fibrils from hot press MFLC, and we were not really successful to separate individual MFLC. But for the wood fibers in the hot pressed structures, we were able to disintegrate them into individual fibers. As you can see, the once recycled wood fibers here from 2% residual lignin content and 17% residual lignin content in these images. And in tensile properties, you see with recycling and re-hot pressing, the mechanical properties of these structures drops. And this is related to damage to the wood fibers and shortening of their lengths. Interestingly, we see once recycled and re-hot pressed wood fibers with 17% residual lignin content show comparably strong structures compared to never recycled and hot pressed wood fibers with 2% residual lignin. We have also showed that this semi-crosslinked PCL we have created is degradable. We have tried accelerated hydrolytic degradation. And in this plot, you see that the degradation rate for the biocomposites, it's comparably much more than the neat polymer. This is related to absorption of the water and enhanced degradation. And this is much more for the MFLC, and this is because of providing higher surfaces and the provision of the water to the surfaces of the polycaprolactone. So overall, we have been able to create different products from high yield, high lignin containing kraft wood fibers. And we have showed that we can do wood fiber recycling. We can degrade the polymer, and possibly we can recycle the wood fibers. We can possibly also recycle the degradation products from the polymer degradation, and this is also possible for industrial composting, incineration, and landfilling. And if the conditions are right in the landfill, this can be possibly hydrolyzed or biodegraded. So to summarize this part, we have shown that the energy demand related to wood fiber and wood fiber biocomposites is much lower compared to nanocellulose structures. We have also shown the possibilities in end-of-life management, like wood fiber recycling and polymer degradation. And also the hydrolytic degradation rate was largely increased in the biocomposites. And this was dependent upon the reinforcement geometry. So to conclude this work, we have showed the effect of residual lignin content on the fibrillation process of wood fibers, the effect of lignin content and lignin and hemicellulose on mechanical properties of hot pressed biocomposites, and also effect of reinforcement geometry on mechanical properties of fiber and fiber polymer biocomposites. And regarding sustainable development, we have shown that the wood fibers have much lower energy demand than MFLC biocomposites. And for the end-of-life management, we have showed different possibilities: recycling of wood fibers, degradation of polymer, and we can also tailor the degradation depending upon use of the different reinforcement geometries. And overall, these all improve the understanding for material design. some suggestions for the future work. So we think that lower porosity wood fiber biocomposites are very interesting, and possibly we can add some extracted lignin or mix MFLC with food fibers, or we can use shorter fibers. We can also polymerize stronger aliphatic polyesters like polylactic acid for high performance biocomposites. And by this, I really would like to thank my supervisors, Professor Lars Berglund, Professor Tom Lindstrom, and Dr. Fredrik Berthold for their help and guidance along the way in my PhD studies, and also my co-authors, Per Lindian, for helping me in pulping, Dr. Peter Olsien for helping in PCL synthesis, and Erik Ljungstedt for helping in mechanical properties measurement and modeling for the hot press wood fibers, Dr. Shong Wu for help with TEM, and my colleagues and friends at KTH Fiber and Polymer Technology Department, particularly Biocomposite Division, and also former colleagues at Rice. And I also would really like to thank my family. They are not here, but probably my family members are online and following. And I'm really thankful for their support, even from distance. And also, I thank the funding agencies, SSF, STFI, Association of Interested Parties, Nathan Alice, Wallenberg, and Stroenzo Biocomposite Program, and also Research. And thank you all for your attention.